you do not understand white supremacy, what it is, and how it works, everything else that you do understand will confuse you. In all of these 9 areas of activity, economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. Anywhere on the planet, minute by minute, day by day, all of the time, all of the time, all of the
time. Good morning and grand rising. Namaste. However you would like to be addressed, I say good morning to all, and welcome to the Counter Racist Code Show with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. I am your co-host, Mr. Bobby. We welcome you into the program and its format. And again, thank you for the pleasure of your time to listen and participate in today's show. Speaking of participation, if you would like to participate, you can do it in 3 ways. Number 1, dial this number, 516-453-9921. When you are connected, press the number 1 button and you will get in line so that your call can be answered or will be answered. And then if you would like to be and give the call screener your name so that I can properly introduce you. I want to caution you that I am working to be better on names, pronouncing your names. But as usual, because I am flawed, I will mess it up. But just know that it's not on purpose, it's all in love. You can also Gmail me at the numero 7, Mr. Bobby, BOBBY, at gmail.com. And in that process, do not, please, ma'am, please, sir, do write me a long letter because I'm not going to read it. But I will, when it does come to me, if it's too long, I will ask you to adjust it or shorten it for radio edit so that I can ask the question to Mr. Fuller and he can answer it. And as many of you know who are to the program, and there are some that are new to the program, Mr. Fuller uses, first of all, logic in answering your question, and he uses numerous examples to make sure that you understand, and most of all, to avoid confusion. Please, ma'am, please, sir, do that. Because that's the one thing that we don't want. We want to come to, you'll hear this term, CR. And he'll tell you what that is. We want results, constructive results. You can also get into the chat room by going to blogtalkradio.com, and you want to, I believe you click on the bar that says programs, and then you want to produce Justice Show. And then when you do that, I understand that it affords you the opportunity to get into the chat, and you will get into the chat, and you can ask questions and talk and see what's going on. As a matter of fact, there's about 4 in and out. Helen B69 is there. Produce 21 is there. Rita 888 is there. Still Learning is there. Usually there are a lot of people in there. And an example of some of the things that are asked. Last week's show, Produce 21, says this. He said, Grand Rising's fellow counter-racist scientists, a brief reminder of last week's suggested items. Number 1, determine if actions are addressing symptoms or solving. 2, read pages 238 to 239 of the revised code book in conjunction with Action 1. And number 3, don't be distracted by those who foster confusion. No contact, no conflict. These are some of the things that are discussed and are suggested in Mr. Fuller's book, The United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept. And you will hear a lot about that. You will hear a lot of terms being used, particularly for those who are new to the program. You'll hear a term like VGQ. You will hear that. You want to know what that is, what it is, and how that works, how that applies to you. You will hear Mr. Fuller say, I don't know. You will hear that. You will hear, how do we solve the race problem? You will hear a lot of things. If you don't know, listen and then use logic in trying to, attempting to solve the race problem. And whatever you don't know, ask questions about it and use logic. Okay. I'll repeat myself there. Okay. I think those are the things. Don't forget. Thank you, Toussaint. Don't forget, if you have a question, press that number 1 button and give your name to the call screener, and we'll try our best to get you on. Okay, let me introduce to some and present to others Mr. Neely Fuller, Jr. Mr. Fuller, good morning, and how are you?
I'm still learning.
Okay, you are still learning. Okay, Mr. Fuller, thank you very much. What I'm going to do here, and thank you, Derek with an A. Hopefully I will get to that question. I don't know if we will or not. But Mr. Fuller, I'm going to ask you a question from JK to start off this first program of 2022. He says this, Mr. Neely Fuller, Jr., I request you to please explain why black people need a will. Thank you.
Because everybody has a will in their minds. It's something that they want people to have or not have that are close to them if they're getting close to death. So you might say everyone has something that they probably would like to leave to someone else, even if it's just some words. That's a will. Some excellent advice. An elderly grandmother who in a shack somewhere may say, I don't have anything but a few knives and forks and some plates and bowls and some old furniture that nobody wants because it was given to me by people who didn't want it. And different parts of the world, people don't have a lot of material things, but they do have a will that they want to leave something to someone. Words of what they consider to be wisdom to a grandson. That's a will. But in the Northwestern Hemisphere, in the year 2022, there are some black people who have many, many things. They have a house, they have a car, they have some money in the bank. You should have a will, because you don't know the day that you may leave here. And if you leave anything behind of material, anything of material value, someone has to handle it, one way or another. And when there is no will, a thing called the state, they say, takes whatever those possessions are, and they dispose of it, the so-called quote-unquote state, as they see fit. Why? Because the person said, I don't care what happens to it. That's the assumption. But if you care what happens to it, an old photograph maybe, then you should have a will. And you should get it done if you don't have one, and you have any possessions and someone you'd like to leave those possessions with. right today, starting off this quote-unquote new year, according to the calendar. Have a will made, a simple will, and list the things that you want left to whomever. You might just make one sentence. All my worldly possessions I leave to my cousin, Ralph Green, of 444 75th Avenue, wherever. And that's it. It's a simple will. But something that the people who come in and find you dead will say, now, this person has a few things. What are we going to do with them? It might be hundreds or thousands of dollars in the bank. If you don't have a will, it doesn't go to who you'd like to leave it to. It might be some elderly aunt who is trying to save her nickels and dimes and whatnot, just trying to pay the electric bill. That money won't go to her if you didn't say anything about it on paper. Judges like to look at paper. They want verification. They hear a lot of people talking about what they could have done or what they would have done in all of their cases in court. People say this, people say that, people argue back and forth, lawyers argue back and forth. But judges say, do we have any documentation?
Mm-hmm.
If you look at court TV and whatnot, you usually see judges want to look at documentation. So whomever, who has that bill of sale, you say that the car was sold on a certain date from a person, this person, or that person, by that person, sold to another person. Where's the bill of sale? So somebody steps forward and say, I think this is it, Your Honor. So the judge looks at it and says, well, it seems like this bill of sale, this vehicle, according to this, 4 years ago, is now owned by Ralph Jones. Is this correct? Has this been verified, this bill of sale? Yes, it has, Your Honor. And that's the signature of the seller, and that's the signature of the person, Ralph Jones, who received the vehicle. And it's not his vehicle, which is what we are contending. He says, oh, well, case closed. Next case. You know, they go by what's written on paper. All that talking back and forth. The judge, they hear this all the time. And they're just half listening, in a way of speaking, you might say, many of them. But when you show documents, that makes a huge difference. So, bottom line, make a will. If you have a will, that anybody will receive whatever you have, an old used car, whatever it is, so that it doesn't make what? A burden. It doesn't produce a constructive result for the person who has to handle you and your estate, and even maybe your own body after you're dead.
Alrighty. Thank you, J.K., and I hope all of us take heed to the suggestions that Mr. Fuller has made. And those who are new to the program, Mr. Fuller has written a book called The United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept. We call it the Code Book. There are many other names, which he will also explain. But one of the things in there, these are suggestions. He makes it very clear that these are just suggestions to how to solve the race problem. Just suggestions. and you will hear the word code, what it is, how code works, and how it works every time. You can agree or disagree, but be logical in your assessment about that. Moving on, Mr. Fuller, we have this one. Tucson, hang on. I got you. And Justin, I'm looking at you. Okay, let's do this. This comes from Mr. Lush. He says this. Let's see, Mr. Fuller. This is from the movie list. Let's see, Mr. Fuller. Could this movie be on Mr. Fuller's movie list? The 1954 movie Magnificent Obsession with Rock Hudson, Jane Wyman, Agnes Moorehead, and Barbara Rush. Please, Mr. Fuller, confirm it is a really good movie and it can be found on YouTube. Mr. Fuller, have you heard of that movie? And then secondly, here on January the 4th, 2022, have you read or heard of that, seen or heard of that movie? Magnificent
Yes, I
Seven?
have.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure I might have seen it because I used to attend movies a lot when I was much younger, and I would just attend a movie simply because it's a movie. So I may have seen that movie, but I do not remember any parts of that movie.
Okay.
So I would have to see it. But if a person calls in, the law of compensation, which is what this program is all about, it may be interesting to someone. So if you're interested in checking it out, if you're a movie buff or you are a person, which is what the code recommends, you should look at movies where you try to learn something that you can use, because there are lessons in movies. I found that out a long time ago. Things to think about that you can actually use. Because everything is about doing something or not doing something. And what is the best thing to do under certain circumstances? And what are the worst things to do under the same circumstances?
Yes.
And there's a lot of lessons to be learned in movies, like in books, like in things that happen that you read about in the newspaper. There are lessons there each and every day. So I haven't seen that movie, but if somebody recommends that I should see it and that other people should see it, maybe it should be seen. I think I may have seen it, but I don't remember what the movie was about or anything. But I'm quite sure many movies have lessons, particularly some of the older ones. Some of them, a lot of people may say they're corny. The movie's corny or kind of outdated and all like that. But some of those older movies on the old, what you call black and white screen, back in the 40s, in the 50s, they have lessons. Some of the newer movies don't have any lessons because people are mostly interested in fireballs and technique and a whole lot of action and cars turning over and explosions. I don't know how many movies have come out in the last 30 years where someone is running in front of an explosion. I mean, they need... I'm so tired of looking at that on television. I switch the channel when I see something even advertised. Some person with a gun in their hand, and they're running toward the camera, and behind them is a huge explosion with cars flying up in the air and all that type of thing. And that's supposed to be the highlight of the movie. A lot of video games, I understand, are like that. But I don't think it's a lot of lessons in movies like that.
Right.
Maybe.
Okay. All right. Let me put this question out here, particularly for you chatters. Get ready. Mr. Fuller, in these 2 hours, is really describing and speaking and addressing the race problem in America, or in this concept called America. I'm trying to divorce myself from these concepts. It's taken a while for me to get it into my person. So occasionally I will say America, but I mean the concept that is called America here in the Northwestern Hemisphere. But anyway, one of the things that brings it out, now this is a long article, and particularly for my chatters, Rita, 888, and Purdue's and all of them that are in there, and J.J. Killer just came in. Listen, This is a good one that maybe like your opinion on, but it's called The Story Behind the Human Remains Found at an Arlington High School here in Columbus, Ohio. Now, the article is long, so you have to Google that. But the article is long. But when I read it and studied it and researched it, it addresses every single thing that Mr. Fuller has and continues to talk about in detail. It's called The Story Behind the Human Remains Found at Upper Arlington High School here in Columbus. Google that and have a discussion about that and see what you think, if you agree or if you disagree. But it's the truth. This is evidence. So check that out. I'll be mentioning that. Which comes to me this question, Mr. Fuller. If the truth is covered up, does it produce a lie?
Yes. That's the whole purpose for covering up the truth.
Mm-hmm.
You want to lie about something. You want to hide the truth. The truth shouldn't be hidden about anything, about anybody, about, as long as it's what they call, quote, unquote, equal. See, sometimes people want to tell the truth about one person, but the person who is forcing the other person to tell the truth doesn't want to tell the truth about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
See, so when they say the whole truth and nothing but the truth, well, that's all. The truth is the truth. It's always the whole truth. If you're just telling part of something, you're not getting the truth. So you don't really have to put whole truth. If it's not whole, it's not true. That's why history is not whole, because there's no way to know everything that happened. There's just no way for people to know that. People don't have that type of mind where they can know the history of anything, even a grain of sand. You don't know the truth about the entire history of that grain of sand. Where was that grain of sand 40 trillion years ago?
Mm-hmm.
And you might say, well, 40 trillion years ago, according to our calculations, it didn't exist. Okay, but it existed somewhere before it came into existence.
Correct.
Before it came into existence, it existed somewhere, in some form. Because everything came from something. Now, people may say that, well, no, everything came from nothing, but the nothing had to be there. Nothing had to be there in order for something to come from nothing. According to what? According to logic.
Logic, yes, sir.
But the mind just doesn't stretch that far, so far. I don't know of any person's mind that goes back before that was nothing. I don't know of anybody who knows that much.
Okay. All righty. A shout out with knowledge to Rita 888 for those of you who are in the chat room. Thank you, Miss Rita. She put up the URL where that story that I had mentioned, the story behind the human remains found at Upper Arlington High School in Columbus, Ohio. For those of you who would like to know, now it is a long article, but it describes every single thing that Neely Fuller talks about and has talked about. Describes in detail the lies, the cover-up, everything. Check that article out. Okay, let's do this. I thought that we had Tucson on there, but he's gone. Hey, Tucson, if you're listening again, go ahead and call in because you're not on the screen, but I'll tell you who is. We're going to go out to Justin. Justin in Illinois, you're on. Good morning, and how are you?
Good morning. Good morning. I'm all right. I would like Mr. Fuller to speak to the difference of a black person killing a black person versus a black person killing a white person, because in my area there was.
Go ahead.
Yes. In my area, there was an incident where a black individual killed a white person, and the white people are basically saying hang him publicly, kill him, lynch him, and they don't have that same type of hatred and vitriol when a white person kills a black person or a black person kills another black person.
That's been that way since the beginning of the system of white supremacy. That's the explanation for that type of reaction. And white supremacy still exists, so you can expect that type of mentality to exist. It's called racism. That's the root of it. If a person is non-white, that person is more despicable than a person who is white in all areas of activity 24/7. Economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. A non-white person is a person who, under the system of white supremacy, is basically supposed to be despised. Despised by whom? By everybody, including the non-white people themselves, which is why so many black people kill each other, because they have been taught to despise anybody black. You just automatically do that.
Okay.
That's the system of white supremacy.
All righty. Thank you, Justin, for your call. And you know my moniker, don't be a stranger. Let me back it up here. You are listening to the Counter-Racist Code Show with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. here on blogtalkradio.com. I am your co-host, Mr. Bobby. To get in contact with the show, please, ma'am, please, sir, call this number right here, 516-453-9921. Press the number 1 button, and you can be heard. You can be heard. Ma'am, sir, I humbly ask or suggest that you make your comments or your questions short, or your VGQ, which Mr. Fuller will explain what a VGQ is. Make that short also so that we can get more questions in and he can answer it appropriately. So could you do that? Please, ma'am, please, sir, do that. You can also use my Gmail, 7 Mr. Bobby, the numeral 7 Mr. Bobby, BOBBY @gmail.com. And most of the time it goes to the very bottom of that list, which is an extensive list, but I've been trying week by week, at least for the last 4 weeks, to begin to pick those up. So if it gets on there and not eliminated, not by me, but by the system, I will read it when the appropriate time comes, as I have done even today. You can also go to the chat room if you want to get in that, and there's some beautiful chats in there. Just go to blogtalkradio.com. You want to click on the icon that or the bar that says programs, then you want to go to the Produce Justice program, and then that little place for you to go, enter into the chat room is there, and you'll be glad you did. All righty. All right, so thank you for all of that, and thank you. Let's do this. Let's go to Toussaint. Toussaint, thank you for calling back. I don't know what happened, but I'm glad you're on. Let me get you in here. Okay, Toussaint, there you go.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Good morning. I don't know what happened either. I think I got dropped, but I think it was just my service. It was probably me. But anyways, the question I wanted to ask, first of all, good morning, Mr. Bobby. Good morning, Mr. Fuller.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. I'm calling because I wanted to ask, so I've been listening to this podcast that was about the lynching of Danye Jones back in 2017, I believe, in Missouri, in St. Louis. And so I've been thinking a lot of how we can maybe possibly protect ourselves. There was a video that quoted Mr. Fuller, where Mr. Fuller said the black man is the most helpless person on the face of the planet. And so I was wondering, Mr. Fuller, have you ever thought of maybe a concept of a universal black militia or a black army or some sort of being 10 to 13% of the population in the U.S.? Have you ever thought of ways that we'd be able to defend ourselves, not just at home in America, but just black people overall, to produce justice?
I have thought of it. I've thought of a lot of things down through the years, but when it comes to any type of counter-violence, any type of what you call military action, I cover that in the war section, and war, counter-war, the ninth area of activity in the textbook. But I usually don't talk about it in detail on the air because there are so many details that it may lend itself to confusion if I talk about it outside of the context of those pages in the textbook. So when it comes to the ninth area of activity, war, counter-war, because white supremacy is war, and if you're going to counter it by using violence, I only have just one recommendation for that, and that's a little different from what most people would think in terms of military-type action. In fact, it's substantially different, but it's the only thing that I would recommend, the only approach. Everything else would be what you might call the political approach in but I don't say counter-violence, because you're countering violence any time that you're working against the system of white supremacy, which is a violent system, one way or another, in all areas of activity. So in the other areas of activity, you do it mostly with the use of words, because that's how the system of white supremacy functions for the most part. That's why this thing about critical race theory is, if you use certain words, the lady who is so controversial, I think her name is Miss Jones, a lot of white people are getting very upset. I mean, to the extent that they're ready to what you call get violent. So I've heard. I mean, thinking maybe this woman, something awful should happen to her, or all the people who think like her. Don't come here with that. And she's just talking. I mean, this is not using a cannon or a sword. I mean, it's just words. And so the counter-racism is basically about words, because racism is basically about words. I mean, it was words that put the whole thing of white supremacy together. Words are very important, because words precede action. Thought precedes the saying, the words, and then the next thing is action. That's why one of the titles of the textbook for victims of white supremacy is called Textbook Workbook for Thought, Speech, and or Action. Action comes after the words and the thinking.
Yes. Which I said last week. Now we know what TSA really stands for. Thank you, Mr. Fuller. Thank you, Tassan, and thank you for holding. And for those of you who are in the DMV, Washington, D.C. area, I understand there's some problems there, and it could affect our broadcast today. It could. I guess there's some weather-related problems there, but we have a contingency plan involved just in case we are disconnected or some other type of thing, but bear in mind that. But assuming that it does not happen, we will proceed in the action. This is a VGQ. This comes from Rachel. She said this I believe it was last week. Thank you so much, I guess, for the question that you answered her. But she said, I'm sure She said the code and following logic is finally getting the recognition that it deserves. We as victims of racism, white supremacy, need a code. She says the best. Thank you. So thank you, Rachel, for doing that. Again, thank you, Tucson. Don't be a stranger there. Okay, here we go. Long Beach, I believe this might be California, although there's a Long Beach, New York, but I know one thing. Marcus, you're there. Go ahead, speak.
Good morning, Mr. Barber. Good morning, Mr. Fuller.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning,
yes,
sir.
I do call from Long Beach, California, not Long Beach, New York.
Okay. Okay, got it.
Okay, my question this morning, Mr. Fuller, in your opinion, what are some of the most important lessons or things that you learned in 2021?
Same ones I learned along, basically the same ones I've always learned, and that is we have a system of government, a world government called, in capital letters, the system of white supremacy. And the system works the same all the time in all 9 areas of activity: economics, education, entertainment, law, politics, religion, sex, in all of the areas of activity. Everything that you can name, including, if you want to put it on the other titles that I'm not naming. That is the dominant government of the entire planet called Earth here in 2022. So it's just a continuation since it began. And they have different styles of doing the same thing, but it's still a form of domination and mistreatment of people of color by people who consider themselves as being white and are non-color. And that's, in simple terms, that's exactly what it's for. Domination and mistreatment, with the purpose of gaining what? The purpose of gaining fun, which is what all creatures want, glory, all creatures want to be thought of in some type of way that's appealing to them, to the creature itself. And number 3, material comfort. Now, white people who believe in white supremacy, they get fun, glory, and material comfort out of practicing racism, which means domination and mistreatment of the non-white people of the entire planet. And it's a difficult thing for them to want to give up because it's so beneficial. The most beneficial form of government for people who are classified as white that's ever existed on the face of the planet. So people don't like to, after generations and generations, get used to the benefits that come from a form of government. They don't want to give it up. That's to be expected. So I think that I may have answered the question. Just look forward to more of the same, because it'll be more of the same until people actively change it. Because people just don't usually give up something that they really are wedded to, that they have made a religion of. White supremacy is the strongest religion in recorded history, and it's the strongest political system.
All righty. Thank you, Marcus in Long Beach. Boy, you're up early. What, 6:39 out there? But thank you for your call, my brother. Appreciate it. For those of you who are in the DMV or in the D.C. area, are flights flying out of Dulles, or I always call it National Airport, and then somebody put Reagan on there, so I guess it's Reagan National Airport. And from the pictures that I've seen, 95 is a mess, but a capital M-E-S-S. But if you're out there, assuming that you are out there, because I'm trying to divorce myself from saying the word if. and trying to put in, replace, assuming that. And assuming that you are out there, is everything okay out there, or can you get around now? You know, somebody give me the latest on that, but because we do want you to be safe. Okay, Mr. Fuller, this comes from Derek. That's a good question. Derek, I had to go all the way down to the bottom to get this, but it's a very good question. It says, he said, Mr. Fuller has stated that he was a member of the United States of America military armed services. My question is, now this is him, not me. He said this: if a black man is enlisted in the U.S. military, is he supporting the agenda of white supremacy worldwide?
Yes. But there's an addition that I will put to that for clarification. Every black person on the planet here in the year 2022 is a supporter of the system of white supremacy, because the system of white supremacy is the world government. You're supporting it one way or another every breath that you take just by being here. Even if you're serving time in what they call a penitentiary or a prison, because the system of white supremacy itself is the largest prison in recorded history. It is a prison system, and prisoners usually obey the prison masters, or they pay a penalty for not doing so. So it doesn't make any difference what you're doing in the prison. As a prisoner of war, you will do what the prison masters want you to do. Some people will be lifting and loading at a dock. Other people will be operating a electronic device of some type. Others will be farmers. Others will be assigned to kill other people by the prison masters. Others will be working in hospitals. They all, whatever you see non-white people doing, they're serving the system of white supremacy, because that is the world government. There is no other government. None. There are a lot of people who have gathered together and call themselves a nation or a government, but the white supremacists say, you're nothing to me. Mm-hmm. And when I come around, you will do what I say if you got color in your skin. And that's been proven everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
There's no place on this planet where that has not been proven.
Okay.
Sometimes I just fight you just to prove that I can fight.
Mm-hmm.
And that I can hurt you. And they say, yeah, but sometimes we beat you. And the white supremacists, you never have yet since the beginning of white supremacy. I just quit fighting you. But I could have blown you away. I got the stuff to do it. I mean, but I just didn't want to. I just play games with you people.
Yes.
When I start what you call a war, I mean,
mm-hmm.
these are just little video games that I do just to keep in practice. Because I already got you under my thumb, even when you don't know it. I tell you where you can be. I tell you where you can work. I tell you what type of clothes to wear. I mean, you depend on my electronics. You depend on my ocean liners. You depend on me for everything. You are nothing with your dark self without me guiding you by the hand like a baby. And that's all of you non-white people on this planet, regardless of what you try to show off with. It all comes from me. All of your ideas come from me. When you invent something, that comes from me, because you got to have something to invent it from. That's what white supremacy means.
All righty. D.M. Carter, 72. Self-control and patience daily. Follow a code. follow a code. Mr. Fuller, now notice that, and I deliberately do this as again, now this is just me, I am divorcing myself from non-essential things, and one of the things that I am divorcing from is saying Happy New Year. You know, I don't want to do that anymore. Most of the things, if not all of them, have been taught by my suppressor, and I'm beginning to see that and acting in a codified manner. So that is one of the things that I am divorcing my show. So don't be offended if I do not respond to you by saying Happy New Year if you say that to me, but I would go into a further explanation. But a question came up in the chat room from Still Learning 2, and it was this, Mr. Fuller. What he said, he says, what does Happy New Year mean to prisoners in confinement?
Oh, prisoners in confinement are happy about some things sometimes. People try to find ways to be happy. Drugs go into what you call greater confinement, what we call prisons. And people are, they say that they get some drugs or they get some alcohol and, sneak it in, and they're happy for a little while. Or they are able to win a little money and, in some type of game that they can sneak and do, marble game or card game or something. And they're happy. People are happy under different circumstances. But if any people of color who are on a planet called Earth are happy right this minute, today, if we're just talking about happiness, yes, they're happy in a situation where they have no reason to be happy. And that is because of the existence of the system of white supremacy. It's a system that shouldn't exist. So nobody should be happy about that. But people can't function very well if they're not happy about something sometimes. So you try to find a little bit of few minutes of happiness in the system of white supremacy while you're fighting the system of white supremacy. And if you are getting constructive results in your fight against the system of white supremacy, that should make you somewhat, you might say, happy for the moment. But you shouldn't really think of yourself as being happy in the way that you should be happy until white supremacy has been replaced by what? A system of justice.
A system of justice, correct.
Which means guaranteeing that no person is mistreated and guaranteeing that the person that needs help the most gets the most constructive help.
Absolutely. Absolutely true. Thank you so much. Raymond in California, I'm going to get to you here before I do this. Mr. Fuller, and before I get Mr. Fuller for you to speak about your book, the question that D.M. Carter 72 said, his question, and I'm going to correct myself. It says, question for Mr. Fuller. How do you, Mr. Fuller, manage self-control and patience daily? There you go, DM 72.
Wow. The greater my knowledge and understanding of the system of white supremacy, really. That's it.
Okay.
The more I know and or understand about the system of white supremacy, what it is and how it works, the easier it is for me to function, which is the whole purpose for knowing and understanding anything. It makes everything easier when you know and understand how to drive a car. It makes getting from one place to another easier
Correct.
than if you get in the car and you don't know how to drive. You've never been under the wheel before.
Correct.
Now,
Okay.
just think about the first time that you got under the wheel of a car. You're a whole lot more nervous than you were 10 years later driving a car. So it's the same way with everything. The more you learn and understand about how something works, the calmer you become. The more you understand about fighting a fire, the easier it becomes to fight the fire, and you're more efficient at it. And you're calmer than someone who panics because you've never had to fight the fire, a fire. They never saw a fire. They just know what it's doing.
Yep. Correct.
I think that might be an illustration of
Yeah, it was a good one. I feel it was a good one. Let's see here. This one here. Let's see here. Let me see here. Still learning. You make a very good point. Still learning too, because if people would care to do the history of the calendar, this particular one is under Pope Gregory of the Roman Catholic Church. So I think this calendar is called the Gregorian calendar. I think the one before that was Julian. But I believe the dominant one, or the one that we're supposed to be under, is the lunar calendar. But don't quote me on that. But I think that's it. But it kind of reminds me of the song that I heard. I want to say it was Blood, Sweat, and Tears, but somebody could point that out to me. Does anybody really know what time it is? Check that out for me, 888. Mr. Fuller, this is the time for you to speak about your book. So the floor is yours. Go ahead, Mr. Fuller.
Yes, all the things we've been talking about and what I wrote the book for is in the book. And the name of the book, I gave it 3 titles. The basic title is the United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept. And even though I said that's too cumbersome, people won't know what that is. I wouldn't know what that is. But it's explained in the book. But to be more explicit for the people, the reason for writing anything is people understand what you're saying and why. So then I gave it another title, A Compensatory Counter-Racist Code. Now, that's a little bit better, but it still doesn't explain very much. A Compensatory Counter-Racist Code. Then I came up with another title, A Textbook Workbook for Thought, Speech, and or action for victims of white supremacy, which I said was racism. A textbook workbook for thinking, for speaking, and for acting, and it's designed to help a victim of white supremacy think, speak, and act. Those 3 things, thought, speech, and action, so that you can accomplish what? The elimination of the system of white supremacy and replace it with something better, which would be what? What would be better than the system of white supremacy? Well, the system of white supremacy is a non-just system. It's against justice. It's for people being mistreated and people who need help the most not getting it. That's what it's for, okay? For the delight of people who are classified as white. So you come up with a counter system, and you would call that counter-racism. You're against that system. But it's not enough just to be against something. You have to have an idea of if you're going to replace it, what are you going to replace it with? That would be better than what you got. Well, if you have an unjust system, a just system would be better. That's the logic. And what would a just system consist of? Well, the word justice itself, according to what I put in the book, I had to make up this term because that was the first stumbling block in dealing with racism. What is justice, and what would it look like if we had non-justice? Rather justice. What it already looks like is non-justice, and what would it look like if we had justice? Got to correct that right quick. So I tried to find out what the word justice meant. There is no legal definition for the word justice. I said, no wonder we haven't achieved it. There's nothing you can measure. Because I heard somebody say it's whatever the judges say it is. Well, that's no measurement. You want something you can measure. You want to know when you got it and when you haven't. So I made up one back in 1970s or 80s. I don't remember the exact time. No, I think it was early 90s, where I had a definition for justice. Replace the system of white supremacy with the system of justice. And that's what the book is all about, how the individual person can do that. And justice is guaranteeing that no person is mistreated and guaranteeing that the person that needs help the most gets the most constructive help. Now, I made up that term, that definition for the word justice. And I did that with a lot of terms that are popular. I had to give a new definition for the word America. And America, an American, is a person that practices justice. So America doesn't exist because Americans don't exist. Because why? Nobody practices justice. Well, why is it I say that nobody practices justice? And this is all in the book. Nobody practices justice because, according to logic, you can't have justice and white supremacy on the same planet at the same time. That is absolutely impossible according to what? Neely Fuller? No, according to logic.
Logic,
so
yes,
the
sir.
book basically show the individual victim of white supremacy how to use logic, what words to use, what words not to use, how to explain things, which sometimes I do in a ragged fashion when I'm on the air. I try to be more precise when I'm doing my writing, and many times I fail to do that, I think. That's why people have to ask so many questions about what I wrote, because I'm not the best writer in the world. But you can get the book by going to producejustice.com.
All right.
Producejustice.com. Yes, we should have a code for getting things done. Why?
Yes, sir.
Because the white supremacists have a code for getting what they want done. So you need a counter code. Everything that works according to a code. Electrical code, plumbing code, building code, language code. Language is a code. So you learn how to use a language in such a way that it always works for you and not against you.
Okay. All righty, Mr. Fuller, thank you so much as we come to the conclusion of the first hour. So we'd like to thank you for listening to the first hour. And for those who have to go, thank you, and hopefully you'll come back. But for those who are going to stay for the last hour of the Counter-Racist Code Show today for January the 4th, 2022, hang on. And again, thank you for the pleasure of your time. I got some will information coming up, and don't forget to check out the story behind the human remains found at an Upper Arlington cemetery. That article can be reviewed. I had the information right before me, but my time is running short. But yeah, you want to make sure you read that because it will explain everything that Mr. Fuller has been talking about. Okay, you've been listening to the Counter-Racist Code Show here on Blog Talk Radio. Stay tuned for the second hour. All right. Welcome to hour number 2 of the Counter Racist Code Show with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. This is the January the 4th, 2022 edition of our show. Thank you for listening. Call in at this particular number, 516-453-9921, and be sure to depress that number 1 button so that you can be heard. Make sure you give your name to the call screener. And then when you have your question or VGQ, please, ma'am, please, sir, make it short. Now, I don't know why my Georgia is beginning to come out of me. Maybe that's from my daddy's side, but I am not from the South, but I sure hear it. Anyway, you can also Gmail me at the numeral 7, Mr. Bobby, B-O-B-B-Y, at gmail.com. Please, ma'am, please, sir, do not write me a novel because I will have to send it back to you and ask you to shorten it up, which I have done for a few, and they have kindly done that, so thank you. And the reason being that we want to make sure that Mr. Fuller understands your question and can answer it so that everybody else can hear the answer. And remember that Mr. Fuller uses logic, because the one thing that we desperately try to avoid is corn fusion, or properly called confusion. We don't want that. Absolutely not. That's a no-no. Don't want that. And then you can also go to the chat room, get in the chat room, and there's some beautiful things going on, beautiful conversations in the chat room. Just go to blogtalkradio.com, and you want to make sure that you click on the programs, and you'll find the Produce Justice Show, or is that shows up on that line? I haven't seen it in a while. But anyway, you want to go to shows, the Produce Justice Show. Click on that, and then you're right there for the chat room icon is available, and you can get in that and then get on these good conversations. And one of the things that has been discussed that we started out with the program, a question was about a will. And Purdue's 21 has come up with this, particularly if you're in the chat room, you can see it. But for those of you who do not have access to the chat room, this is what you can do. I'm going to date myself by saying get your pen and pencil ready and paper ready. Anyway, it's here. It's called doyourownwill.com, all one word except .com, doyourwill.com. And it will help you to follow the suggestion that Mr. Fuller answered the question on having a will. He has also said this on other programs, but it's very important that we do that. So it's doyourownwill.com. We'll give you the information on how to do that. That story that I mentioned that explains, or in detail, it is a long article, so give yourself time to read it, but it explains in great detail. I call it the shame of the Northwest portion of our city and what they did. And it is the truth. I backed it up or researched it. It's terrible. But anyway, it's called the story of the human remains found at Upper Arlington High School. That is here in Columbus. It was an article in the Columbus Monthly, and it was about the Pleasant Litchford Cemetery and what they did. It almost made me angry, but I had to get that under control. But that's not your problem. That's mine. Okay, let's do this here. Okay, electronics here. Okay, Mr. Fuller, Mr. Mann wanted to know this. Now, I'm going to try to combine this into one question, but this is from the Gmail. He says this, Mr. Fuller, how does racism become systematic even though discrimination is illegal? And why are the police not investigating it?
Because of the system of white supremacy is the system of white supremacy. That's the purpose of it. You have a white supremacist government for the whole world. It's the world government. World government. in all 9 areas of activity: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, war. It covers everything because it has to cover everything, because there are laws and codes that govern the behavior of people in everything.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the most efficient political and religious system ever thought up in recorded history so far, and the most powerful. Very powerful, very efficient. But it's evil. And so everything comes under it. So you can expect everything that flows from it, other than it does do this. The system of white supremacy is the most productive system ever thought up for handling material things. Where it fails is in the treatment of people, the non-white people of the entire planet. It's a miserable failure. A system of justice would be much better. It's never been seriously tried. It's been talked about by everybody, including the non-white peoples of the planet. People have talked about justice ever since the concept of justice entered somebody's mind, guaranteeing that nobody's mistreated and guaranteeing that people who need help the most get the most constructive help.
Mm-hmm.
That's the logical definition of justice. People thought of that a long time ago, and they give excellent lip service to it. Oh, if you talk to anybody, any king, any master, they'll say, oh, yes, I believe in justice. Oh, yeah, shouldn't everybody? I mean, everybody should. Everybody does, I guess. I do. People will say that in a minute. That'll be an instant answer. But nobody has taken that seriously enough for justice to have been the prevailing influence here on planet Earth. Nobody, all down during the millions of years or whatever that people have been here. People have talked about it, written books about it, made movies about it, have seminars on it all the time. But everything that it takes to go into doing that, it's never been done in recorded history.
Never.
And so the system of white supremacy is about, well, we handle material things very well, and people should be satisfied with that. Now, if it means mistreating the non-white people of the planet, so be it. Because the material things are more important. Things are more important than people.
Ain't that it?
That's the basic logic.
Yes. Things. Things. Wow. He goes on to say, Mr. Fuller, finally, he says, Mr. Fuller, and how can you bring an argument in court that you are a victim of racism and not be a criminal?
By making that, I wouldn't say argument, by presenting that logic in court, which is what I do.
The facts, huh?
Which is what I'm doing right now. I always say, everybody, every minute of the day is in court. Everybody on the planet. Every minute of the day you're in court. Whatever you mean by in court. And every day, everybody is on trial. And what do I mean by that? I mean, you're either for doing the correct thing in all areas of activity, or you're not. So that's a court. Even though it might be a court where nobody's passing judgment right this minute in a way that you know about it, but somebody's passing judgment on you right now without your knowledge. You're being judged. The very fact that you are where you are was the result of somebody else's judgment. Where you are, where you're located at this very minute. and what you are doing at this very minute. Like I'm on the phone talking right now. This is a result of somebody else's judgment. If you stop and think about it logically speaking, that's what I mean by following the logic. Neely Fuller is on the phone talking about racism as a result of what? Of the result of racism existing. That's number one. And Neely Fuller being born in a system of racism. I wouldn't be here talking about racism if it didn't exist. I'd be doing something else.
Correct.
So that's the logic. I did a little rambling there, but
that's okay. You did good.
I may not answer the question.
No, you did good, Mr.
A huge part of the code is being able to think at another level. That's a requirement, because the level we have been thinking on so far has not worked. We have to think at a different level altogether. White people, non-white people, all people, in order to solve this problem called the system of white supremacy. Why? The system of white supremacy is still in place.
All righty. You answered the question sufficiently, Mr. Fuller. Okay, get ready. We're going down in Georgia. Georgia, Raymond. Guess what, man?
Morning.
You finally made it in.
Yeah, morning.
Good morning, sir.
On page 224 of the code.
Which of the code book? Revised?
Yes, sir.
Okay, 224. Okay.
Yes. The bottom paragraph, there's a question say, which of the following statement should a person say that he or she knows is true? Mr. Fuller make 8 statements behind it, and then he asks a question at the end of it. If none of these statements are true, how can there be a so-called race problem between non-white people and white people? Could you answer that for me, please?
Okay, the last part on page 224, which of the following statements should a person say that he or she knows is true? And he has eight statements there?
Yeah.
Okay, and what do you want Mr. Fuller to do? What do you like Mr. Fuller's? What do you want Mr. Fuller to do?
Oh, he asked a question at the bottom of it, so I'd like him to answer that question for me, please. Because my answer is all the statements are true. All the statements are true, especially number 8. But I'd like him to answer the question he asked at the bottom of all those statements.
Okay. Mr. Fuller?
That's page 222, correct?
224.
224.
At the very bottom. And then there are 8 questions there. I'm looking at them, starting at the bottom of page 224 and then going over into the second page. And then he particularly pointed out the last question where it says, all people are to blame for the existence of the so-called race problem.
And he wants that explained?
No,
Is that right?
not
Is
that.
that
You
right,
asked
sir?
a question at the bottom. No, he asked a question at the bottom of that. I'm saying that number 8 is true. All the statement is true, especially number 8. But I'm saying he asked a question at the bottom. If none of these statements are true, how can there be a so-called race problem between non-white people and white people? You can just answer that briefly, please.
Okay.
Well, someone will have to answer that. Because...
Yeah. I already answered. I like your answer.
In other words, you already have the answer?
Yeah, I have my answer, but I like your answer.
Well, what is your, my answer is exactly what it says.
Yeah, all is true. All of them is true. Yeah, I agree.
Which of the following statements should a person say that he or she knows is true? Non-white people are inferior to white people. White people are inferior to non-white people. That's one. Another one, like number 5, is non-white people are to blame for the problems of non-white people. Well, and then I sum it up in after number 8 by saying, if none of these statements are true, how can there be a so-called race problem between non-white people and white people? And so the question is, why did I say these things in the first place? I guess. Is that the question?
Wait a minute. Let me get him. Okay, Raymond. Raymond.
Yes, sir. He good on point, Mr. Bobby. Yes,
okay.
Sir.
He said yes.
Why did I say these things in the first place? To cause a person to think about everything that is said. In other words, it's to help a person think logically. That's why I wrote all of that in there. That's the way I remember having written it. I didn't remember that I wrote that. That's why I was kind of stumbling through it. I've written a lot of things that I've kind of forgotten about. But when I refresh my memory to the best that I can, that's the reason I wrote it. A lot of things that I said seem to be contradictory. And all of those things that you see there on those pages. A lot of things you say, well, why would I even raise that? But basically, since it's a book about thinking, speaking, and acting, it's like a training question, or a training in what? In trying to, not indoctrination, but in helping a person to think at a logical level. Not to think about what just in the way that they're used to thinking, but think at another level and get them in the habit of asking questions or making propositions for a question that they've never thought of before. Because that's how all progress is made. All progress is made through questions and answers, and you try to raise questions that have never been raised before. Or you try to think at a level of logic that you never thought of before. And this is how problems are solved, because what we call progress is about problem solving. That's why I say that black people haven't made any progress at all. Why? Because they haven't solved the race problem. That's the biggest problem on the planet. So you always try to solve the biggest problem. And since we're not even trying to do that, because we don't recognize it as being the race problem as being the biggest problem, we don't act like it. We act like there are all kinds of other problems that take priority. So if you don't solve the biggest problem, you're not going to solve all the other problems. You've got to start with the biggest problem. Handle that first, and then you can work back on the smaller problems. But in answer to the question, I wrote that basically as what the book calls for, thinking. Now, everything that I wrote could be for a long discussion where everybody would have input on any one of those statements that are made. These are statements that are made. They're either constructive or true or false, or they're not. But they're things that people should think about. That's basically what I wrote all of that for, as far as I can see at this point. When I review it, I might come up with a better answer. But right now, that's the only reason I see that all of those statements even exist. Because some of it, most of it, sounds kind of wild. Really, to me. Non-white people are to blame for the problems of non-white people. Well, is that true or is it false? See, when somebody says something, that's the first, but it's something to think about. Are non-white people to blame for the problems of non-white people? Non-white people are to blame for the problems of white people. Is that true or false? So you start, because you're always searching for the truth.
Yes, sir.
regardless of how anybody feels about it. Otherwise, you're not going to solve a problem. You're not a person who is dead set, focused on the truth. Truth plus justice plus correctness equals what? Peace, which is what everybody says they'll love to have. But it hasn't been produced yet because people have serious problems with what? The truth.
The truth. Okay. All righty. Going to the chat room. Hang on, Terrence. Hang on, Terrence. This comes from Mr. Jones. He says this, Mr. Fuller. He says, Mr. Fuller, if a cop, which is constable on patrol, says they're going to tase you, but they shoot you instead, should they be punished?
It depends on the circumstances. If that was the intent. Now, something should be done, but that's for people to decide after you find out what? The truth. I went to a law enforcement school.
Yes.
In Brunswick, Georgia, in the 1980s. And the instructor was asking questions about what is the first requirement of a law enforcement officer. What are the qualifications that a law enforcement officer should have? And people held up their hands and said different things. I held up my hand, but I wasn't called on. But I was prepared to say the first requirement of any law enforcement officer is to have the correct intentions. I mean, all that stuff about arrest procedures and handcuffs and tasers and firearms and being able to run faster than anybody else and with a lot of equipment on you and being a quick thinker and being able to engage in a car chase. I said, that means absolutely nothing in correct law enforcement if that law enforcement officer does not have the correct intentions. So everything in the universe, when it comes to cause and effect, that's going to affect people, has to do with when people interact with each other, what is the intent? A mother may drown her baby with the intention of saving the baby, but actually she doesn't know how to swim, so she's actually putting the baby in greater jeopardy by what she is doing because she's in the water and she does, because of her lack of knowledge and understanding about how water works, she's thrashing about in a way that a skilled swimmer would never do. And she winds up drowning herself and drowning the baby. Or she may even save herself just by luck. But the baby drowns. See, so, but it comes down to, you say, well, she drowned her baby. No, that wasn't her intention of thrashing about like that in the water. She just didn't know how to swim. Didn't know what she was doing. That was not the intent. So in answer to the question, that's the same with a law enforcement officer who you have to figure out, she really intend to do this because the person, from what I saw, in an instance that they might not be talking about the same thing, but recently, last year, that incident actually happened. The person said they mistook their firearm for their taser, or their taser for their firearm, and the person wound up being killed. But then I'm saying the person who was killed was in the process of doing what? What was that person's intention? Of resisting. And so that's why I've told black people, when you are in the custody or taken into custody by a law enforcement officer, don't fuss don't fight, don't flee. Why? Because ugly things are going to happen to you. That's why. That's been proven over and over again. Yeah, if things go south, if they go bad, it's not going to be for the other people. It's going to be for you.
Yes.
If you start showing any signs of resistance, or you want to fuss, you want to argue, even if you are 1,000,000% in the so-called right, don't do it. That's not the place to do it.
Yes, sir.
That's not the place for showing off. That's not the place for a theater, even though you have an audience. This is not show business.
Yes, sir.
This is business of life and death. And you're talking about your own life and death, because you're not talking about nobody else's. You are the one that's going to die. So why act like you are not the one when you are the focus of everybody's attention at the point of guns, at the point of people saying they're threatening to do you harm? And you're going to fuss, fight, or flee, and you're not going to be able to, but you're going to pretend that that's what you're going to do and win. It's not going to happen for the most part. Nowhere on the planet. So stop doing it. Stop fussing, stop fighting, stop fleeing. Wait. What do? You wait until the situation changes and the voices are calm and you are talking to lawyers and people like that, if it's a place where you have one. And then things are working out much better for you and everybody else involved.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Fuller. Let me break it here. You are listening to the Counter Racist Code Show with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., heard here on blogtalkradio.com. Now, this particular show, all of our shows, are also reproduced at producejustice.com almost immediately after this show is not live anymore. You can go right up and hear this show, repeat this show, as well as other podcasts that are on there at producejustice.com. We thank you for listening, and if you do have a question that you would like Mr. Fuller to answer, simply dial 516-453-9921. Press the number 1 button, and you will get in line, and I will try to get you in. You can also go to my Gmail, number 7, Mr. Bobby, BOBBY, at gmail.com. I'll try to get you in. And the chat room is available. Just go to blogtalkradio.com, and you want to click on for shows, and it is the our programs or shows, the Produce Justice Show, and then you click on that, and then you get into the chat room. It's right there. It's right there, partner. And you can get in there, and they have some beautiful chats going on. Thank you, Cholo Revolucion. If I said that correctly, I'm always having problems with that. But Produce 21, you've been off the chain today. My goodness. My goodness. Good stuff. Good stuff. Okay, let's see here. Where am I at here? Boy, computers. Okay, before I get to you, Terrence, so you're going to be next after this, Ron and Swa. I'm going to try to get you all in. Mr. Fuller, this is from Anthony in England. Yes, we go worldwide. He says this: Dear Mr. Fuller, I am currently doing a lot of reading about a race. The late 19th century saw the rise of racial pseudoscientists that put the white race at the pinnacle over all the darker peoples on our planet. In the first quarter of the 21st century, we have Black Lives Matter, race soldiers killing black people in America, KKK, and the rise of white extremism as a transnational security threat. Mr. Fuller, it appears to me that we have not made any progress in solving the race problem in almost 2 centuries. Regards, Anthony from England. Is that VGQ, Mr. Fuller?
That's VGQ, and the whole purpose of the textbook for victims of white supremacy is to help the individual person to solve the race problem by replacing it with something better. And what would be better than racism? A system of justice, something that people have given lip service to like forever, as far back as I can remember. But nobody has taken it seriously enough to take it all the way. And what is justice? So that we know it when we got it. Guaranteeing that no person is mistreated. You got to guarantee that. If any person is being mistreated, you don't have justice. Because you have mistreatment. Mistreatment is mistreatment. Nobody's supposed to be mistreated. People are not made to be mistreated. People, by whatever created people. That's the logical way to go. And the other part is guaranteeing that the person that needs help the most gets the most constructive help. Now, we've seen little symptoms of how that can be done, and I've given this illustration many times on the air. When you hear the siren, lots of traffic is on the highways. But what does everybody do? They pull over to the side and let the ambulance. There's a person that needs the most help, dire need of help. This person is on ventilation. You know, they're barely being kept alive. They're breathing. And they're trying to get them to a place where they can breathe better than what they're breathing now. And they need to get there in the fastest way that they can. So it's kind of understood that when you hear that ambulance coming, you see it in your rearview mirror, off distance, trying to get through traffic, weaving through traffic. You pull over, and everybody else starts doing the same thing, and you let the ambulance go by. Now, you're disgruntled. You try to get back in the line of traffic. You're kind of running late for an appointment, and you get on your cell phone in these modern days where people have cell phones, some of them, and you try to contact whomever you're supposed to contact, and you explain that you had to pull over on account of the ambulance. Traffic kind of got backed up and bogged down for a little while on account of maybe several ambulances came through. Auto accident, fiery crash, people seriously injured. Now, we understand that principle in little small ways, which are really large ways to the people who are hurting. But when, on a world scale, we don't understand that or pretend we don't understand it at all. You say you can't guarantee that nobody's mistreated. Yes, you can, if you put your mind to it. People have done all kinds of things, all down through history, that they said can't be done. So the better system over the system of white supremacy would be a system of justice. And nobody should be ashamed or have to hang your head down or kind of sneak and say that. No. Replace the system of white supremacy with the system of justice. Why? Because the system of white supremacy is designed to mistreat people. It's designed by purpose. The intent is to mistreat people and to guarantee that the person that needs help the most won't get it. It's designed for that. So you want to replace that system with the system of justice. And everybody should say that in one voice and then do all the things that it takes to make that bring about, make that come about. In fact, the universal question is, this thing that we are doing, is it going to produce that result? That should be the question for 2022 and on into the future until it comes to fruition.
Yes, sir. Okay. We're going to move right along. Don't forget that we started off with the program, a question was asked about a will, and Mr. Fuller gave why the importance of having a will. And Produce 21 came up with this that people can contact to do your own will. It's called doyourownwill.com. And it will give you the procedures that you need to do your own will. So make sure you do that. Also, that article that is going on right now is called The Story Behind the Human Remains, found at Upper Arlington High School here in Columbus, Ohio. There's a beautiful article in there. Beautiful in this tense. It explains in detail everything that we've been talking about on this program, and Mr. Fuller has been talking about ever since I know him. It goes into great detail. Cover-up, conspiracy, lie, cheat, steal, all of it. All of it in this article right here in great detail, and the descendants of it and what they're doing about it even now and today. Shame on you people that choose to ignore that, living in the northwestern side of Columbus, Ohio, in your pristine area. And I'm not even going to name the mortgage company, very profitable and prominent, that is doing that kind of stuff. But anyway, that's that. All righty, moving on. Terrence, gosh, man, we finally got you in here. You are on with Mr. Fuller. What is your question?
Hey, good morning, Brother Bobby. Good morning.
Good
Mr.
morning,
Fuller.
sir.
Good morning. I want to tell you, first of all, in 2022, I think having you all in this program in my life has been very constructive, and so I appreciate you all.
Thank you, sir.
I want to call in from now on and try to give some example of what I've learned from Mr. Fuller's conversation and book. And I would offer or suggest that other people do too, so we can start showing examples of what we're learning instead of just always seeming to ask the same questions. So my BCQ today is, I gave a definition to the word procrastination. And my definition is, procrastination is lying to yourself. And that's, you're lying to yourself about some action that you want to take. And so, according to the code, lying to yourself is a form of disrespect. And so, therefore, procrastination is a form of disrespecting yourself. And so, I would like to ask Mr. Fuller his thoughts on procrastination.
Okay, thank you, Terrence. Mr. Fuller, your thoughts on procrastination?
Well, my thoughts on procrastination is what I've been taught is the definition, the traditional definition of the word procrastination, meaning deliberately putting things off that you intend to do, but you are really not getting around to doing them. And that's how it's described, I think, in the dictionary. That's how I at least understand it. I don't think I've ever actually looked at that definition as such in a dictionary, but that's what I understand it to be. When people say to me, you're procrastinating, I understand it to mean that they're saying that I'm putting things off that should be taken care of now. And so if a person wants to give it that definition, compensatory definition, that it also means you're disrespecting yourself, a person can do that. That's what the code is designed for. You use words or tools, and you take words just like you take any tool, and what are tools for? To accomplish the task that one thinks needs to be done. That's a tool. You have something, and that something may be in the form of something made out of wood or metal, or it may be a word. You're trying to accomplish a task. So you always fashion a word, according to compensatory logic, in such a way that the task that you're trying to accomplish, you help it by giving a word that will help you, a word with a definition that will help you to accomplish the task that you're trying to accomplish. And that's what codification is all about. So the call is correct in doing that. But
Okay.
But my understanding of the word procrastination is the traditional one, simply because I didn't see a need, or even now, I don't see a need for changing the definition of the one that's traditional. But if a person, like the caller, sees a need for it, by all means, the code says, do it. And that would be your code for doing the job.
Mm-hmm.
And when you use that term, you can explain what you mean. That gives you control of the term. That's the whole idea of counter-racist science when it comes to the use of words.
Yes, sir. Okay. Terrence, my man, my good man, thank you very much for your call. And you know the acronym. Don't be a stranger, which you have proven that you're not. Thank you for your call. Before I go to you, Ron, out in L.A., Swah, you're in back of him. Mr. Fuller, have you been contacted, or do you know when you will be on Kathy Hughes' radio blogs, which happens to be the one I'm speaking about is WOL, and in particular, the Carl Nelson Show?
I don't know anything as of yet for this month.
Okay.
Usually I'm called, now this is just usual, not always, at least once a month. So this is the beginning of the month, and
yes.
I haven't heard from the WL facility, Mr. Carl Nelson and his show here on January the 4th. But I'm always available to him for reasons that have been set up for his show at least once a month.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there you have it, everybody.
But they notify me. I don't know until. And when I am notified, I put it on the website, producejustice.com.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you. So that's been the update then. Okay. Hey, Ron, get ready. Home of the champions, L.A. You're in the house. L.A., go ahead, Ron.
Good morning, fellas. Good morning, Dr. Fuller and Mr. Bobby.
Yes, sir.
This is Rami, L.A. I'd like to first start off. I don't have a question. I had a VGQ statement of gratitude. I would like to thank you. In the year 2022, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Fuller, for inspiring what's going on, the second generation of thinkers that's focused on replacing the system of white supremacy with a system of justice. Mr. Bobby, I'd like to thank you for your consistency in interviewing Dr. Fuller every week. We really appreciate that. Now, nobody said that the system will be replaced quickly, but trust me, it is. We're chipping away at this iceberg. It's working. Right now, I have both of your books. I have the United Compensatory Code System Concept and the Word Guide. And I'm also reading Tariq Nasheed's new book, which is a continuation of your words and thoughts. And I'd like to encourage everyone to just read and come up with constructive methods in replacing the system of white supremacy with the system of justice. Once again, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Fuller. Thank you, Mr. Bobby. I'm out.
Okay. Thank you, Sir Ron. And I'd like to thank Mr. Fuller because I'm here on this program doing this because Mr. Fuller requested or allowed me to be here, and I am here. Other than that, I would be doing other broadcasting, particularly sports. That's what I almost started off with, sports. Actually a sports broadcaster here at it's almost out of existence, W08BV-TV8. They used to call it the heart and soul of Central Ohio. But anyway, that's neither here nor there, and I'm not doing sports right now, but I am available to you. All right, anyway, SWA, L.A. again. You in the house, man. Go ahead.
Greetings, Mr. Bobby. Greetings, Mr. Neely Fuller.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Neely Fuller, a definition given for retarded is less advanced in mental, physical, or social development than is usual for one's age. And my question, Mr. Neely Fuller, is are non-white people retarded?
Yes.
Whoa.
All non-white people are held down, held back, held up. They are disabled by the system of white supremacy. We are crippled people. Once you become a prisoner of war, you're crippled in many ways. And we are all prisoners of war according to what? Neely Fuller? No, according to the evidence. White supremacy is a war system. And they have captured all of the non-white people on the planet that we call Earth in all areas of activity. Economics, education. You see, the evidence shows it. See, this is not supposed to be random talk. You're supposed to tell the truth. Is it true that the white supremacists have captured the non-white people of planet Earth? Yes or no? The answer is yes. So that system is very efficient in having done what it's done here in the year 2022. In economics, the use of time and energy, they're the most powerful people on the planet. Those white people who believe in white supremacy, dominating and mistreating people based on color. Are they the most powerful people on the planet when it comes to what we call education, having knowledge and understanding of how to get things done, how to move things about? What does the evidence show? Yes, they are. Why? Because you see non-white people saying, I want to get educated. And what you say, well, how do you get this education? Well, which way did the white people go? I mean, tell the truth now. All over, people in boats falling in the oceans and whatnot, saying they want to go somewhere where things are better. And they say, what do you mean by better? And they say, well, in the village where I come from, I can't get educated. So I got to take a chance on my children drowning. Which way did the white people go? Because I got to find out from them the things I ought to know that I don't know to keep from starving, so that I don't have to just stay the same year after year in misery. I get around some white people, well, you're going to have a lot of misery when you catch up with the white people. I say, yes, but at least I won't starve. They will feed their prisoners of war. They will give me medicine that I don't know anything about, because everybody in my village is dying. We need to tell the truth now. Does white supremacy exist or not? Yes. It's the biggest show on earth. Right in your face. But we like to be in denial. And the worst thing that people can do is want to believe a lie by telling themselves that they are great when they are not. The greatest show on earth is the system of white supremacy here in the year 2022.
Wow. Which way did the white people go? Thank you, Swa. Mr. Fuller, what do you think about this? Since you said that, which way did the white people go? I've noticed, not only here in this area, but all across the United States, keeping in mind what you just said, which way did the white people go? The white people went to the suburbs. As a matter of fact, there was a guy named Levitt, and there's a bunch of towns called Levitt towns all across this concept in the Northwest Hemisphere called America. And they didn't want us in there, but eventually they began to let black people into those places. The black people left the, let's say, inner city or the city. They became run down and tore down. But I've noticed this trend that the white people who have got together in conglomerates or investors have gone in and purchased the black areas or so-called black areas on the cheap, renovated it. Some of them even moved into those areas, raised the rent or mortgage or whatever you want to call it to a substantial level that those that have the affordable income can move in there, which happen to be white people. I think it's been called gentrification. Now the blacks can't get in, back into the area. You know, where did the white people go? Have you seen this where you are at, and how do we buck that trend? Where do the white people go when it is financially costing us and losing our identification as people because we don't have that money, we don't have resources. So what do we do?
It's going to happen as long as you have the system of white supremacy. That's why we have to get rid of the system of white supremacy. There's no such thing as escape. You either have the system or you don't have it worldwide. It's got to be worldwide or it's not going to work. Just trying to have it work in a neighborhood or in a town and whatnot, that's temporary. Because the system of white supremacy is the dominant political and religious system. It's a religion.
Yes, sir.
All over the world.
All over the world.
In the code book, in the original code book, you have a term that I made up called psycho racism, meaning they keep doing the same thing over and over again.
Yes, sir.
And there's nothing we can do about it except get rid of the system. That's why it's got to be gotten rid of.
Yes,
I mean,
sir.
we can't keep playing around with it. They'll keep moving us from place to place. That's what you do with prisoners of war. You move to this camp, then you move to that camp, then you move back to the camp where you were originally. I mean, you know, they take the people called Indians and put them on this reservation, and they say, okay, all right, you're kind of halfway get established now. Now we got to move you again. So they all pack up what little they got, drag their trailers to the next place. Okay, 5 years pass. Okay, we're going to put a casino here, or we got a big project here. We're going to build a city here. All right, you got to get out again. So hey, keep them squatters moving. You know,
is that racial?
That's something that they did. The movie Shane kind of typifies that when white people just dealing with each other. Keep them squatters moving. All right, people can see that's on the movie list.
Yes, sir.
Compensatory, where that lesson is taught in the movie Shane.
Shane.
Between ranchers and cattle people. See, a lot of the things that they do with black people, they have done among themselves. That's why they're so good at it. Black people are not used to it. See, but every type of gangster operation that you can name, the white supremacists are the masters of it.
What you just described, is that what they call racial dislocation?
Yes, that comes in the textbook. That's all in the textbook. Oh, yeah, you're not going to be permanent nowhere. You think you're all set, and and here they come. See, when they come up, when they say move, you better get ready to move, because you're going to move if they want you out. Right, and that's all over the world.
Yes.
They'll have whole populations move and try to come where they are. See, you have to keep chasing them down, because when they move, they take everything with them that is of value, and they disrupt everything that is of value that they leave behind. Like they'll poison the water. They're leaving, but they poison the water. You move into the area, so you got poison water. So you got to chase after them again in order to get fresh water. I mean, it's a laughing situation. They just laugh at us all over the world 24 hours a day. They say, what are we going to put on them next? Oh, let's try number 37 out of 4,000 things that they have to pull. See, they got a bag of tricks that doesn't end. It doesn't end.
And the evidence that you are the evidence shows that what you said is true. It's backed up by fact. Okay, let's see here. Whoops. Well, he's gone. Okay, last question. Got to make it quick. John, Houston, you're in now. There you go, John.
Grand Rising, gentlemen. How are you, Mr. Bobby and Mr.
Good,
Fuller
sir.
Jr.? I guess the quickest question is, what you going to do in 2022?
Okay.
I might elaborate slightly because I know time is running out at the top of the hour.
Yes.
What can be the perspective approach to who are completely ignorant, obviously? Secondly, not highly motivated. And third, you just pointed that example out with gentrification. You're moved out. What I just heard Mr. Fuller Jr. say is moving from one prison camp to another prison camp to another prison camp. So I know Tyler doesn't have time to really answer, and I'll try to call next week. Or what action plan suggested, whether by him or by you, Mr. Bobby, on small, simple things that people can do. And you both have a great day and a prosperous 2022.
Appreciate it, John from Houston. We had another caller, but he's gone. So guess what? We're down to 3:49, and the clock keeps going down. So, Mr. Fuller, your book, and then we're going to close out the show. Thank you, John, and don't forget to call back next week. Mr. Fuller, your book, and then we're going to close the show out.
Yes, that question. What do? We need a code. We've never even tried to have one. That's why I wrote the book. It's called the Compensatory Counter-Racist Code. And someone asked me some years ago, said, Fuller, is this the whole code? I said, there's no such thing as a whole code until the problem is solved.
Mm-hmm.
But I have written the first, you might say, format for one, but you got to be making code every day. And what is code? Whatever you do works for you, not against you. That's basically the simple way of putting it. We don't have anything like that. The white supremacists, when they make a move, they have already figured, hey, I'm not going to lose on this. It's impossible for me to lose. Why? Because it's codified, meaning it's following the logic, cause and effect, the laws of the universe. They follow those laws. They're more efficient at it than anybody. Black people just go by how they feel. Feelings are unreliable because they change every 5 minutes. Feelings have to be attached to logic. Logic is a code. It means every time you do it, it works for you, not against you. That's when you know it's code. We got to be trying to write things that handle every situation in every area of activity every day, and then run trials on it, because you got to run trials on it in order to find out whether it works or not. And something that works, keep doing it until it doesn't work. All right? But if it's code, it will work. What you say and what you do. This is it. I can't say it enough. It's right there in front of us. You know, we got to have a code. We don't have one. We never attempted one. We just think that jumping up and down and making a whole lot of pretty statements and whatnot is enough to do it. Slogans.
All righty. Ain't going to happen. Get the book by going to producejustice.com. That's producejustice.com. One more time. Producejustice.com. Thank you. All right. For everybody that's on, chatters, callers, thank you. Thank you for listening. Mr. Fuller, most of all, thank you for your words. Thank you for your wisdom. Blog Talk, thank you for allowing us to do this.
And we'll try to do better.
Absolutely, we'll try to do better. Thanks for listening to the program. Hopefully, we said something that will inspire you. ProduceJustice.com is where you go to get all the materials that we have, Mr. Fuller has talked about. That's ProduceJustice.com. Tell a friend. Tell a woman. Tell everybody. Neely Fuller, ProduceJustice.com. Thank you again for the pleasure of your time. We'll see you next week.
Thanks to everybody.